session and the upcoming budget. And then, of course, anyone who would like to ask questions, I'm happy to answer those anytime during this or at the end, whichever seems more appropriate. First of all, is just listening to your previous speaker here, as you know, since March of this year, the economic outlook and the economy in general has been dominated by the COVID-19, not only the infection rate, but the response by both local, state, and federal politicians in order to slow the infection rate down and treat this until we get a trusted vaccine in that. I will mention that before this all happened, Virginia's economy was very, very strong. I'm not saying everybody in it was participating in the same manner, but overall, it was performing well. And I mention that because that has helped us weather this here a little better than maybe some of the other states, certainly in the country and also surrounding us. In fact, Virginia is a little bit of an anomaly in how we've been able to cope with this downturn in the economy brought on by the closures related to the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of how that filtered into our budget, as you know, back in March was the governor's introduced budget, his main budget for his 4-year term, and it included almost $2.7 billion over the 2 years of new spending over and above our base budget for many of the issues I know that you guys are going to be talking about today. But unfortunately, because of the closures related to the pandemic, most of that new spending had to be put on hold or unallotted as we determined how our economy was going to respond and how long this pandemic was going to be impacting us. So the governor took some immediate actions and stopped all new spending, all new hires, curtailed any non-essential spending in April of last year till we could determine how we were going to be impacted. Now, the good news is that our worst fears weren't realized, but certainly it did have a negative impact on our revenues. And it looks like the absolute bottom of economic activity in the Commonwealth was sometime around the end of April, the first part of May. Now, that's our fourth quarter, which is the April through June, is where a substantial amount of our tax receipts come in because of the final payment of income taxes for the previous year. So we were expecting a fairly significant decline. We did get a decline, but not nearly as much as we had anticipated. We only missed last year's budget by about $250 million, which is a great deal of money. But we were expecting or thought it could be almost 4 times that, or almost $1 billion. And a lot of that has to do with the impact of the closures in the Commonwealth on the businesses that were impacted. You've heard it said, this recession or this downturn because of the pandemic is really a service sector or a Main Street recession. Those businesses that could work from home, that were essential, have continued to do okay. Those that depend on crowds, that depend on interaction with our community, like restaurants, the lodging industry, the tourism industry, particularly those areas that require people to be gathered together on vessels or other events, have been hit pretty hard. But fortunately for Virginia, a lot of our major businesses, we are like, for instance, the federal government is a major employer in the Commonwealth. Amazon, Microsoft, these large tech companies, our large defense industry, our shipyards in Hampton Roads, they have been able to remain open, and in many cases have actually increased employees. Amazon added significant amount of employees, not only in the Commonwealth, but across the country. So our largest employers have been able to remain open. Now, I don't want to minimize the impact it's been on those that have been impacted. It's awful. Our restaurants and those small businesses have been significantly impacted. But in terms of how it translated into revenues for the Commonwealth, we have about 250,000 businesses in the Commonwealth that pay us withholding taxes on a routine basis. And approximately 235,000 of those have payrolls of less than $3.5 million a year. And they are the ones that have been impacted. But they only represent, even though they're 95% of the businesses, they're only about 25% of the payroll we collect for taxes. In fact, the top 1% of businesses, the top 1,300 companies, pay us over 50% of the withholding collections. And they have held up well during this economy. So you can't look at the unemployment rate, which I got over 10% in the Commonwealth, and then say our revenues are going to be down 10%, because they were mainly isolated in those smaller businesses. And again, I don't want to mitigate it. In fact, what we've got to do is we've spent most of our efforts the last 8 months on fighting the pandemic. We're going to have to transition, and we've already started this, to helping these businesses get back on their feet. But overall, it's allowed the Commonwealth, because our revenues have held up, has allowed us not to have to lay off individuals like many states have done. And we've had a full-on effort for us to support our K through 12 schools. No cuts have been made to K through 12. They didn't get some increases they were looking for because we had to suspend some additional spending, but no cuts in schools, no cuts to localities. And no cuts to our prisons or our social service workers or our first line responders that many states have had to do. Now, of course, helping us has been the fiscal stimulus that the government put in place. That not only put money in our consumers' pockets and our businesses, but it gave direct money to the Commonwealth to help our localities for direct impacts of COVID-19. Like acquiring PPE, like helping nursing homes and our first responders to acquire not only the necessary equipment they needed, but to hire people because of this pandemic. So while we have had significant impacts, it has not been as significant as other states have had. Now, having said that, it's had a significant impact on our budget. The governor just signed a special session budget that didn't restore most of that $2.7 billion that was lost. In fact, most of it had to be permanently taken away out of our annual budget. But as part of that, we continually do forecasts of our revenues. And as the upcoming session will begin here in a little over a month, it appears we're going to have additional revenues to be included to help bring back some of that spending. So the good news is that while we didn't have to cut, and we didn't have all the negative impacts that some states have had, our businesses have responded, and we're starting to come back a little bit. Now, what could impact this slow recovery for us? If we don't get another stimulus package, and I'm not from Congress, and I don't suspect, I'm not asking from the state's perspective, but to help those people on unemployment, that's going to hurt the Commonwealth and across the nation. In fact, I believe if we don't have another stimulus package, all the money that's gone before will have been not to its best use, because many people are still out of work. So hopefully they will have stimulus package that will continue to support businesses and individuals that are laid off, who will then spend. And of course, our spending has been held up because of that stimulus. So without another stimulus package, that could slow the slow rebound that we've been having here in the Commonwealth. Right now, a big effort is the ability to, we think we're going to have a vaccine. It looks like the Pfizer vaccine may receive authority to be dispersed here in the United States within the next week or so. So we do see the end in sight. However, that first about a vaccine across the nation is only going to be about 20 million vassals of the vaccine. So it's going to be a while before this works its way into across the nation and across the Commonwealth. Although we are projecting that we will start getting some of the vaccine before year end. And in fact, our upcoming budget the governor will present here on December 16th assumes that we will have to budget for that distribution across the Commonwealth. And I know the governor's going to have a news conference a little later this week to talk about those efforts that have been done in preparation once we get this vaccine. So it looks like by the middle of next year, a lot of this vaccine will be in place. But there are two factors that will determine how long these socially distanced measures and other preventative measures will have to be kept in place until we reach the type of community immunity that is necessary for us to be safe. We've been in this pandemic about 8 months without a vaccine. And right now, we have about 7% of our population is immune to it. So 8 months to get to 7%. Some people call that herd immunity. In other words, if we just let the virus run wild, how long would it take before we got immunity? And our health experts are telling us we need about 65 to 70% of community immunity for it to really be safe for us. Obviously, to get there without a vaccine would result in many more hospitalizations and many more deaths. So that's why a vaccine is so important. The two factors in the vaccine that help us there, to get us there, are first, its efficacy or how effective it is. The good news for us is that it looks like 2 of these vaccines are over 90%. That is great news. Most of our flu vaccines are only about 50% effective. And why that's important is because the second important factor in all this, excuse me, is how many people in our population will get the vaccine. We need as many people as possible because you have to multiply those probabilities together as to the percentage of the population that takes it and the percentage efficacy of the vaccine. So for instance, if a 90% effective vaccine and only half the people take it, that means we've only got 45% immunity in our community. So we need at least 70% of the people to take this vaccine to get us up to that 60 or 70% that is needed for us to be safe. So that's why a lot of our efforts will be on having the citizens understand that the vaccine will be safe and it's needed for us to get back to normal. So that will be part of our budget. And of course, a big part of that budget will be us transitioning from fighting the virus to helping our businesses and our individuals get back on our feet. So that has been sort of the focus of the last, our main focus over the last 8 months as we transition into getting this vaccine and helping businesses. I think you'll see being able to add back some revenues that were lost. I think you'll see the focus also go into those other issues that your previous speaker and others are going to talk about, the other impacts of this virus on our Commonwealth. If you go back and look at the history of pandemics across our country, one thing seems to be certain, it is that trends that were going on before the pandemic are accentuated and sometimes become mainstream. For instance, online buying of products. That's here to stay. It was going on before, but we had about 10 or 15% of our products bought online. Now we're upwards of 75%. And I think you're going to see online sales be a bigger part, which means that the retail industry is going to look a lot different than it did before COVID-19. The real estate industry, many companies have found that they can have employees work from home. Do they need the space they had before? That's going to be a different, still be there, but it's going to look different after all this comes into play. So what we need to be focused on is the new normal, but it's probably not going to look like the old normal, not only from a health perspective, but because of these trends that are coming about. And I expect this upcoming session to deal with some of that and add back some of the spending and the expenditures that had to be curtailed as because of the COVID-19. And I expect you're going to see continued help in those areas hardest hit, first of all, from the pandemic, like nursing homes and our hospitals, but certainly these small businesses, which we've used a lot of our stimulus funds for to help get back on their feet. And let's hope the new administration in Washington will recognize the need for additional stimulus help for our citizens. So that's a little bit of the thoughts and where we've been focused. The governor will present his budget on December 16th for the upcoming session. As you know, the last special session was almost 90 days. And this session, which is normally 45, right now there's not agreement. It looks like it could be shorter, but hopefully that'll be worked out before then. But I expect you will see the social justice issues also be continued during this session as we move forward. And with that, I think I have a couple of minutes, Madam Chair, that I see some chat questions. I'm happy to address those if that's agreeable with you. So if somebody could show me the questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you. There are two questions dealing with unemployment.
Yes, ma'am.
It's true that 70,000, is it true that 70,000 Virginians have not received unemployment due to an outdated computer system?
I don't know about the exact number, but it's a large amount coming from the Virginia Employment Commission. Part of that has to do with the integrated systems that were in place. And this is Secretary Ball and our Director of Workforce Development, Megan Healy, have been working a lot on this. So that was part of it. The other part has been the qualification of the individuals, the information needed. And it appears that the Commonwealth has gotten better at being able to get out those who apply for unemployment. But if there is an exception, there remains a big backlog in that area. I have no excuses for that. I know that the individuals in DEC have been working on it. As you well know, we've had well over 1.2 million people file for unemployment. By the way, the most since in our history. Obviously, it happened very quickly in that regard. And it also goes to show, this is something else I'll point out, that the non-investment by the Commonwealth over the years in some of its infrastructure has been front and center now here as it dealt with the pandemic. So just like when I was former Secretary of Transportation, you have to put repairs in roads and pay for it, same way with this infrastructure. So without making any excuses for where we are, I know those individuals are working hard, but yes, there does still remain quite a few individuals that are caught up in having to deal with getting the appropriate documentation in those systems to having received unemployment. Having said that, well over a million, have received that, and over 400,000, as I speak today, have continuing claims as we go forward. So yes, there are a significant amount that are having difficulty and have not worked through the system yet.
Thank you. Secretary Layne, we have a minute for one more question. Will collecting state sales tax be more difficult with online sales? Will we lose more revenue?
No, as a matter of fact, it's exactly the opposite. Last year, the Commonwealth, the General Assembly passed a law, and the Commonwealth, the governor signed the ability to tax internet sales. And in fact, that's where the majority of sales are now, and that's already integrated in our systems. So no, ma'am, that will not be a problem. In fact, it's become easier for us to collect those.
Secretary Layne, thank you so much. We appreciate your expertise. We appreciate knowing that Virginia is in as good a place as it can be, and appreciate knowing that we positioned ourselves very well for what we were not expecting. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I hope you have a great conference.
Thank you. We will now be taking a short break, and we will resume at 10:30. Yes, 10:30. So don't be late because we will start right on time. Welcome back from a short break to the League of Women Voters of Virginia legislative pre-session. A reminder that this is being recorded, and if you wish not to be recorded, you can turn off your video. So next we have with us Lisa Gutherie from Virginia Transit Association. She's the executive director, and also with us is Danny Plaugher, the deputy executive director. So welcome so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. It's always a pleasure to be with the League of Women Voters, so I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit about public transportation this morning. So Danny's going to start with a little background about where things stand right now, the transit lay of the land.
Okay. Do you have the slide, Lisa?
Let's see, am I empowered to share the slide, or are y'all going to do that?
Yes, you are.
Okay, just a minute. I don't see where I have that opportunity. Let's see.
Lisa, at the bottom is a green button that says share screen. At least on my computer.
So I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, just a minute. I've got chat, I've got participants. I do not see share screen.
Everyone should have screen sharing capabilities. If you shoot it over to me, I could get it up.
I see it now. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. I don't know if you see both my screens or just the one I intend for you to see. Yeah. Okay.
The one, and then if you want to, right now we're looking at preview mode. If you want to hit the little presentation box, and then we can roll through it. It's at the bottom, next to where it goes with the minus and the plus. It looks like a little projector screen. Right there. Yep. Yep. One over. Next one. There we go.
Okay.
Excellent. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you, League of Women Voters. Wonder if nope, I don't have power. Okay. Next slide.
Okay. Okay. I got it.
Normally this is reversed. My apologies. Usually I run the slides and Lisa gives all the good information, and I'm going to do the first couple slides. This presentation, we're going to go over a little bit of public transit's 2019 impact, how COVID has impacted transit. We heard a little bit about how COVID has impacted a lot of things from Secretary Layne, and then looking at what's next. So next slide. And so this map that you see is a map of every locality in the Commonwealth of Virginia that transit touches. Some of these localities, they don't have a lot of transit. They may have one route that goes in 2 stops. Think about like Danville going into the neighboring counties. It goes in a little bit, but not a lot. But we still count that locality as having some public transportation. Maybe not a lot, definitely not good, but something to build on in the future. And so next slide. And so when we look at public transportation's overall impact here in Virginia, 6.1 million Virginians have some sort of connection, 2.4 million of our jobs, 70% of our higher education students, and the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, has one of the most diverse public transportation networks anywhere in the United States. We have buses, which handle over 70 million passengers a year. We have subways and light rail, like Metro or the Tide down in the Hampton Roads, that handles nearly 93 million trips a year in Virginia. We have commuter rail like Virginia Railway Express that handles nearly 5 million, 4.6. And then we also have paratransit and van pools that handle another 4.6. And we even have ferries down in the Hampton Roads, which handle over 327,000 trips a year. So all in all, we have a very diverse transportation network. And when you look at its impact, economically, it generates about $4.4 billion a year in economic benefits. It creates or sustains over 28,000 jobs. And the median salary of a transit rider in Virginia is over $54,000. And so we have a lot of commuters who utilize these services that are very important, as well as those where the service is absolutely essential for them to get around, to go to the doctor or get to their job. In regards to the environmental benefits, transit removes 1.1 billion passenger miles off our roadway every year, reduces our fuel consumption by over 14 million gallons, and reduces our CO2 greenhouse gas emissions by over 130,000 metric tons. And so by not burning that gas, we're not releasing, or not burning that fuel, we're not releasing all those greenhouse gases into our breathable air. So we are making a positive benefit for our environment. So next slide. And so these numbers are from GRTC here in Richmond. I only use them as an example. GRTC, in regards to most of our transit networks here in Virginia, is one of the networks that has been the least impacted in regards from COVID. Some of our more commuter-oriented systems, like Metro, if you've watched the news, has to reduce service because of decline in ridership. Same with VRE or some of our other commuter rail services. But GRTC has a large base of individuals who absolutely, that service is essential to their day-to-day lives. But if you look at ridership from July to February of 2019 compared to 2020, before the pandemic impacted, ridership was up double digits. And we saw that across all our transit networks all around Virginia. Ridership was up, sometimes maybe not double digits, but we were growing public transit's share of the marketplace, so to speak, before COVID hit. Next slide. And then when the pandemic hit, we saw double digits declines. GRTC's ridership from March to June, the end of the fiscal year, declined 24%. Some of our transit networks saw declines of 70, 80, or 90%, all because of the impact from the pandemic. And even though transit networks, our public transit, is safer than eating at a restaurant, we still have a long ways to go to help make sure that we fully educate that our transit networks are safe, but we have to ensure that they stay in place to help us get out of this pandemic. And so next slide. And another way that transit has really been impacted by COVID is in the funding sphere. When you look at this box, this is from FY29 of all the transit funds in Virginia. 26% of them come from fare box, so ticket revenue. 33% come from local or regional governmental bodies, either a locality or a regional entity. 21% from the state, and another 20% from federal sources. A lot of our transit networks went zero fare, which means that 26% basically disappeared overnight on a lot of our systems. And so that was a huge budget gap that a lot of our networks had to try to make up. And how do they maintain the service levels to serve the constituents that they need to if they're losing nearly 1/4 of all their revenue? And so next slide. So what has happened? Thankfully, the Commonwealth Transportation Board and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation saw kind of what was coming down the pike, and they put $11 million into a stopgap measure in March, before the pandemic was really fully comprehensively realized, to help our transit agencies try to get through it. Obviously, that $11 million only went so far, and thankfully Congress acted early with the CARES Act, dedicating nearly $455 million to the transit agencies in Virginia to try to help them maintain through and get through this pandemic, with the majority of those funds going to Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads getting about $70 million, Richmond getting about $36, and the rest of Virginia getting about $94 million. I have to say that most of that money is gone or is going away, so we need another round of CARES funding. In this past General Assembly, had the pandemic not happened, I think Lisa, myself, and every public transportation advocate would have been celebrating and probably taking much longer vacations in hot, warm, sunny places, because this session was probably one of the most impactful that I've ever seen in my 15 years in the industry.
Excuse me, Danny.
Reorganized the public transportation network here in
Danny,
Virginia.
excuse me, you have a minute left.
Okay, sorry. We had very impactful. We changed the way we did public transportation. We increased the amount that public transportation's funding got from the General Assembly. We also created a Central Virginia Rail Authority, or not Rail Authority, Transportation Authority, that dedicated nearly $200 million to transit and did the same about in Hampton Roads. and these were all pre-pandemic. So, Lisa, if you want to roll through, I'll let you take the rest, and I apologize for being wordy.
No, that's fine. I'm going to go pretty quickly here. I'm going to show you.
You all have less than a minute.
All right. Well, needless to say, we did not realize the revenues that we thought we were going to get from the omnibus bill from 2020, but at least the bones are in place for future revenue. This is the new and revised allocation model, and we will be benefiting from that when we bounce back. Right now, we have a special session numbers here that show that we were down 870 million decrease because of COVID impacts. We hope to have some new revenues come December when the governor's budget is presented to the General Assembly later this month. So we are trying to rebuild our ridership, rebuild our funding, and make sure that we get additional federal funding as well. And that is also reflected in our state legislative priorities. It's primarily to preserve what we have in place. So we'd be happy to share this information with you after the presentation today. And I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for signing on to our coalition, Faces of Transit. It's on our webpage. You can see a lot of videos showing the benefits and the essential services of transit. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Danny.
Okay.
Next, we have Sharon Stone, who is with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women of Prince William County. Welcome, Sharon.
Good morning, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for having me this morning. I just want to briefly share with you some of the issues and concerns that the National Coalition of 100 Black Women advocate on. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women advocates on the behalf of Black women and girls, and through our advocacy, we work as change agents to influence policy that promotes gender equity in health, education, and economic empowerment. We believe that through our efforts, we'll fulfill our vision of seeing Black women and girls living in a world where socioeconomic inequity does not exist. There currently are 5 National Coalition of 100 Black Women chapters within the state of Virginia. We have a Northern Virginia chapter, the Prince William County chapter, the Richmond chapter, Charlottesville, and Tidewater area. We recently advocated to the special, August Special General Assembly on the below issues, or the issues that I'm going to share with you, and we will continue to advocate on behalf of those in 2021. Specifically, we've addressed criminal justice and civil rights reform. We support police accountability and transparency. Not limited or related to not limited to or related to the use of force, increase the training and education of officers and recruitment and hiring of those processes to create a decertification of law enforcement officers. We support reform looking at the expungement within Virginia. We know today that there's no way, whether you have been convicted or not, for someone in Virginia to have any charges expunged. And looking at ways to increase good behavior sentence credits. We also advocate in the area of economic equity and empowerment. We're looking at what's going on amid the COVID-19 from an educational perspective, early childhood education. How can we get some sort of tuition breaks for community college attendance and all? And of course, affordable housing for the community, not just at a low income, but with COVID-19, we understand that there are people who, well, first and foremost, before COVID, housing in Virginia has skyrocketed and has not kept up with the income of the constituents. So you could be college graduates and still not able to afford housing in your area. We also support passage of those COVID-19 relief and protection looking at even beyond those essential workers, but looking at frontline workers who have to also work and what kind of health and sick leave benefits they can have. In the areas of health, we support efforts to address and combat racism by declaring racism as a public health crisis in the Commonwealth. We can look at it from an objective perspective and create solutions to bridge those gaps in policies and actions that are ongoing. We support mental health resources, again with COVID-19. There has been an increase of mental health issues, known and unknown, but also with law enforcement, they creating.
Sharon, when you turn your head, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, so is this better? Thank you. Okay, so the MARC alert system, so that we have a way to identify acute mental health. We're also looking at ways to advocate domestic violence when a victim is with their the person who's doing the domestic violence, or then there's really not a way to call for help, but how to reach out to those individuals. It was in the Prince William County chapter, where I am a member and the chair of our Political and Social Action Committee. We realized that the state can't do everything, and so we are also doing our part to continue to advocate on behalf of our community. And so we have partnered with sponsors and received donations to host food drives and provide food to individuals within the community during the COVID-19. We have recently received grant from the Response COVID-19 Community Foundation to provide personal protective equipment to individuals within our community. So that ranges from face masks to Clorox and wipes and all of those kind of things. While it sounds very insignificant, individuals who are struggling whether to eat or have electricity would not necessarily run out and buy those things to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. We realize that resources are limited, and we continue to work with our partnerships. We provided on the 21st of November over $15,000 worth of PPE, just giving it out through the community in partnership with Dell City Civic Association, as well as on the 19th of December, we're partnering with our sponsors and all to provide over $10,000 worth of food donations to the community. And again, we will continue to advocate on those issues that I've addressed. We know that the general session did address broadband and a lot of the concerns around criminal justice reform. We will continue to advocate on those, and also with looking at the needs in the community based upon the extended of COVID-19 or the resurging in the pandemic, and how we can support one another. If there are any questions for me at this time.
We don't see any, but you have a few more minutes if you have anything else to tell us.
Well, okay, so I didn't want to run over my time. I did want to share that there are some things that we work as the United Chapters of Virginia. Of course, with the areas that I identified, things like housing and the needs of the community vary. But we are in our Northern Virginia, we're partnering with like Grand Park Middle School and Ripon Middle Schools, and we have mental health initiatives, and those schools have created a mental health club that's called the RAP, Restoration and Protection. It's kind of helped take away the negative stigma of mental health, and then again how to deal with the tensions, or even identifying. A lot of times we do not know where that we're experiencing mental health. I see some of the questions in the chat. How does the National Coalition of 100 Black Women receive money? Our proceeds are through sponsorships. We've received over $450,000 in grant from Potomac Health Foundation. That's where we've educated our community and partner churches on things such as triple negative breast cancer, diabetes, colorectal cancer, mental health, and those type of initiatives and things that are impacting our society and our constituents. And we do partner with other organizations whenever and however we can. I see, is there a question here on partnering with the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence? Yes, we are reaching out to them. Our website is the www.ncbwpwcc.org. We are continuously looking at ways to advocate and support our community. Our educational needs of children being addressed with virtual. How are the educational needs of kids being addressed with virtual learning? Currently, that is a gap and a concern for us. We have a number of mentoring programs where we mentor middle school and high school, but we realize that a lot of parents are not equipped to be educators in the home, and so how we can give them the tools to help facilitate, and looking to partner with anyone that can help us with some of those tools that we can share with our constituents to help them. A lot of, again, with the mental health and the stress, being in the house, trying to be the educator and trying to understand how you're going to even provide resources to keep the roof over the house, because a lot of people are unable to work from home. So with that, those are the things. And again, I thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for allowing us to have this opportunity to speak. And we will continue to reach out with all around to advocate on behalf of our constituents. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much. I am wondering if maybe our next speaker is on the phone, and I'm looking for Jill Harkey with NAMI Virginia. Jill, Kathy, are you with us?
Yes, this is Kathy Harkey, and I am participating by phone. I apologize. I entered into the session about 10:30 with Zoom, but it kept going out on me. My internet is a little sketchy today, so I called back to assure I wouldn't lose you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for having me. We truly do appreciate the League of Women's Voters inviting NAMI Virginia to participate today. And, you know, basically NAMI Virginia envisions a world where all people that are affected by mental illness live healthy, fulfilling lives that are supported by a caring community. And the impact of COVID-19, as you know, has been tremendous on the mental health community. We're offering numerous free virtual services. One of those is a helpline. And then we also have a resource page that we've added to our website with an array of mental health and COVID-related resources. We've also increased our social media distribution, our campaigns in the community. The calls that we're receiving to our helpline have been a little bit overwhelming in as far as the impact that this has had, not only on people who were living with a mental illness or affected by mental illness prior to COVID, but also the people who have developed illnesses since COVID. We have increases in depression, anxiety. The prior speaker mentioned stress, which is also an increase. Some of this is coming about because of loss of work, loss of homes, the social isolation that we're living with. But also, in addition, there's been a great impact on families. And much of that is stemming from the changes that we are now facing with isolation in society, at-home schooling, teleworking, working from home, and trying to balance the children being home while you're working from home, balancing that work and assisting your children with their education and meeting their needs within the home. And it can be difficult for a lot of families, especially when the children are younger. And so in addition to that helpline and providing whatever resources we are available through that, as well as the website and our social media, we've kind of restructured our programs within the organization to where we are now providing adult and family programs online, which include family-to-family and peer-to-peer programs. We're providing youth and young adult programs online. And then we've moved significant portion of our Virginia Family Network and Youth Move Virginia programs and deliverables online as well. I've heard the previous speakers speak about legislative advocacy priorities, and of course, NAMI Virginia, we have our own that center around mental health and co-occurring disorders, which might be a mental illness and a substance use disorder. And also mental health goes hand in hand with suicide and suicide prevention. So some of the advocacy issues that we've worked on, of course, funding was unallotted, funding that was awarded for mental health during the regular session in 2020 was unallotted when the governor needed to revise the budget based on COVID-19 funding needs. And so during the special session, which was kind of a bit of a wild ride, it was different than anything I've ever faced before. We were advocating for reallotment of funds, and some of our legislative priorities, of course, included permanent supportive housing, workforce development, crisis stabilization, funding that was unallotted for the Systems Transformation Initiative, or STEP VA. And so in 2021, our advocacy priorities moving forward continue to include permanent supportive housing and the workforce development, because we've lost people in the workforce due to COVID. And so not only did we need to develop the workforce that we had prior to COVID, we now need to work on the workforce that we may have lost due to COVID. And then crisis stabilization programs and services are crucial, and those mobile crisis units, so that they can meet people where they are in their recovery and deliver services to them in the community. And then we know that peer recovery specialists and family support partners, or peer and family support services, are crucial to recovery, and the research totally backs that up. So we want to see that more in Virginia. And we continue to support the STEP VA, or System Transformation Initiatives, and case management in and outpatient services. Another thing that NAMI Virginia has heard about a great deal throughout this pandemic and the challenges that we face are the need for equipment and broadband so that individuals can access telehealth services. We've discovered through phone calls and different events that we've held online that because a lot of people living with mental illness live on limited incomes or fixed incomes, they may not have the equipment or broadband services to be able to access telehealth. So that has either caused them to deteriorate, their condition to deteriorate, or it's kind of put a wedge in where they are in their recovery. And so we did a summit back in May, and we were able, through a wonderful donation that we received, we were able to provide tablets and a hotspot card for 30 days to people who need it to be able to access services, as well as putting out information that's offered through our helpline on how to engage in telehealth, how to, you know, find out who those providers are and how to access that service. And so we were able to reach about 54 people with that equipment and the hotspot card, so that they were able to move forward with their telehealth to maintain their recovery. And so that was something that that we had not really even thought about in detail until that information started coming into us. And so we are going to be advocating for broadband and equipment. We did during the special session, and we plan to continue to carry that over into the regular 2021 session. I do realize that there have been changes for the upcoming regular session. There's discussion of taking it to a 30-day session. The session is virtual. Also, there have been limitations put on, you know, generally they are put on bills, but there have been limitations put on pre-filings, which is a little bit unusual. And so we're kind of keeping our eyes and ears open as to the direction that the 2021 regular session will take.
Okay.
Excuse me, Kathy, you can't see, Kathy, you can't see our timer, but you have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you for that. And I can use the last minute for questions and answers if you would like. The last thing I was going to mention is our advocacy day is still going to move forward in a virtual format, and we're kind of developing that now. And so I hope that we have some of you on our email distribution list, and I hope you will join us for that. So thank you for allowing me to join you, and I'm open to any questions. I can't see the chat, so if you have any for me, if you could read those, I would appreciate that.
Has NAMI promoted crisis intervention training for police departments?
Absolutely. We have been, NAMI Virginia has been involved in, and our affiliates have been involved in crisis intervention team or CIT training for years. And we do participate in those trainings as a part of the training team at a lot of localities. Here in Central Virginia, I know we're a part of the team in Richmond, Henrico, Hanover, all the different districts, including District 19, which is Petersburg. And so, yes, we certainly advocate for that, continue to advocate for that, as well as participate in the actual trainings. Thank you for that question.
Kathy, thank you so much for joining us and for persevering with all of the technologies available to you. So thank you so much.
You are very welcome. I look forward to joining you again in the future.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Jill. Our next speaker is Jill Hanken. She's the director of the Center for Healthy Communities for the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Welcome, Jill.
Hello, everybody. I'm used to seeing all these wonderful ladies in an auditorium someplace or a nice conference hall. So it's great to see you on Zoom. I'm glad to be here. I wanted to bring everyone up to date first on some of the policy changes, some success stories from last year, and then we'll talk about things that we'll be working on in the 2021 session. Many of you know me from the Virginia Poverty Law Center, where I specialize in health law. So that's going to be the focus of my talk today. And we did manage to get some success last year through the General Assembly and also through the special session. So you may have heard during last year's session, the General Assembly did adopt new protections against surprise billing of consumers who have certain types of health insurance. That new law will take effect in January, and we'll be getting information out to educate consumers about the scope of those new protections. There's also new protections for Medicare beneficiaries who are under age 65. They get Medicare because they're disabled. They will now be able to purchase Medigap insurance, Medicare supplemental insurance, even though they're not 65. That's been a problem in Virginia. That law will also take effect in January. In the budget, and this took getting things through the special session because these were all items that were unallotted during the first stages of the COVID crisis. I'm very pleased to report we got a new Medicaid eligibility rule adopted by the General Assembly that will help legal immigrants get Medicaid services. It's called the 40-quarter rule that was restricting access to coverage for immigrants who were already in the US for over 5 years, but they had not worked for an equivalent of 10 years in the United States. A big problem for legal immigrants is being removed effective in April. So if you work with immigrant communities, legal permanent residents, folks with green cards, other legal statuses, they will now have easier access to Medicaid after April. Virginia was one of only 6 states that had this restrictive rule. So we're really pleased to get rid of that. We're also, in terms of addressing maternal mortality concerns, the General Assembly did extend postpartum coverage for women who get Medicaid or famous health insurance coverage. From the current 60 days, it will now become a 12-month postpartum eligibility. This will protect women during a very vulnerable time following a pregnancy when most maternal deaths do occur. So we're pleased about that. And a biggie that everyone should know about for our Medicaid program is the new dental coverage being implemented for adults. Virginia has very comprehensive dental for children. It also had dental for pregnant women because of the complications from a dental infection for pregnant women, but adults didn't have coverage at all for dental. So that change was adopted. It's a pretty big ticket item. It will take effect in July. So that's a quick rundown of 2020 successes. Moving to next year, we're going to continue to work on immigrant eligibility and maternal health by promoting a change in policy that will allow all pregnant women to get prenatal services regardless of their immigration status. So just to be very clear about this, this will allow undocumented immigrants to also get prenatal care through the Medicaid program, you know, if they meet the financial requirements. Currently, undocumented women can get labor and delivery services through Medicaid at the time that they go into labor. That's treated as an emergency service, but they don't qualify for any prenatal care. Now, these babies are US citizens, so it certainly makes sense for these moms to have access to good prenatal care. And very interesting fact is that DMAS, the Medicaid agency, in evaluating this policy change, found that it would be cheaper for the state to cover the prenatal care for these women rather than paying for the emergency services at the end of pregnancy. So this is a cost saver. We support it. The Healthcare for All Virginians Coalition supports it. DMAS supports it. And we're looking to see this change in the governor's budget that's going to come out on December 16th. It's a win-win all around. It saves a couple of $1 million. So we're really excited about that. Only 16 states do provide this coverage. So we're really keeping our fingers crossed that this is going to happen. If it's not in the governor's budget, of course, we'll be promoting it during the session. There are some other rules for immigrant young people that we want to improve to keep them in the Medicaid program. And regarding COVID, we think that emergency Medicaid services for immigrants should cover all COVID screening, testing, treatment, and of course, vaccines for immigrant populations. It's a way to keep individuals safe. It's a way to keep communities safe. It's a way to keep all of us safe. So those are other Medicaid initiatives we'll be pursuing in 2021. We have an elder lawyer at the Poverty Law Center who is going to be working on nursing home staffing issues and also ongoing concerns about visitation, families needing to visit their loved ones during COVID. In other health insurance issues, and this is very important, it's a complicated issue, but something that more people need to understand and get behind. We are expecting Governor Northam to promote what's called a reinsurance program for Virginia's marketplace, which would bring down the premium costs for folks who get marketplace insurance. The way the premiums come down through reinsurance is by bringing, whoops, something saying my time's up. I talked too long. So reinsurance, and we'll be opposing anything that detracts from the marketplace risk pool. Some of the short-term health plans and association health plans will continue to oppose. So I appreciate the time. There are other things going on at VPLC in terms of evictions and foreclosures and utility cutoffs. And we always appreciate the collaboration with the League. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. We do have time for one question, and there's a few about the dental coverage. Does the dental coverage include adults with disabilities? And
yes,
how do people, yes, and how do people learn about these?
Well, the dental benefit, as I said, will not start until July of 2021. And we do expect DMAS and others will certainly be advertising the availability of this new service. And it will be available to all adults. Now, remember, for our expansion population, the federal government pays 90% of the cost. And that was a very important part of getting this through.
Thank you.
But it will apply to all adults.
Jill, thank you so much. We appreciate your sharing this exciting information with us.
Thank you. Sorry I went over my time.
Yeah.
No, it's perfectly fine. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Next, we have Meg Ryan. She's the Executive Director of Virginia Coalition for Open Government. Megan?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Deb, and for inviting me, and for Mary for herding all of us together like the cats that we are. And this is always a great program, super helpful and informative, and allows me to put faces to names with a lot of the organizations that I see. So as you've probably heard from me in these sessions in the past, transparency and access to government information is the thread that stitches all of these advocacy groups here today together, as well as those that aren't here today. And that's because advocates and individuals and members of the news media, everyone needs access to government records and meetings in order to assess the landscape of their particular area of interest, as well as to help formulate effective public policy in their areas of interest. So this universal application of access, transparency statutes, and particularly the Freedom of Information Act means that the coalition has a far-flung and diverse agenda every year. And to be frank, it often puts us at odds with some of our traditional supporters or people who might otherwise be interested in the work we do. But when it comes to their particular legislative priorities, sometimes they may not agree with our positions. And that's not a fun place to be, but it is necessary for us to be there and to advocate for the principles of open access and accountability without regard or without too much regard to the particular substantive area that is at issue. Our legislative priorities, in truth, often mean we're just playing defense, because we never know when a particular piece of legislation will slip in a provision that we think compromises public oversight. But we do know of a few things that are coming down the pike and a few things that we're pretty sure are coming down the pike, but we're not totally positive yet. So a couple of things to mention then that we either know of or are pretty sure of involve a bill to provide some measure of access to to inactive criminal investigative files. Virginia's law currently allows law enforcement to withhold records related to a criminal investigation long after the investigation has concluded, either because it's a cold case or because it's the person has been convicted and served their time, or because charges have been dropped. Virginia's law doesn't distinguish and lumps everything together and says you don't have to release anything. So this bill that's being carried by Delegate Hurst will provide some measure of access to inactive, closed, whatever word you want to use, not ongoing criminal investigative files. We've been talking with some folks, because I've done some research on fees, the fees charged for accessing public records. We're going to be talking with some other legislators about oversight of higher education boards of visitors, in particular the type of how they conduct their meetings. There were some issues, there have been issues over the years always, but some particular issues that arose with James Madison Board of Visitors this fall, after they sent students home and then held a Board of Visitors meeting without providing any electronic access for parents or students to observe the meeting. So looking at some, I don't know what that's going to look like, but have been talking with folks about that. We are going to again be supporting bills to make the votes of the Virginia Parole Board public. There were two measures, identical measures, that were introduced during the special session that were both, I thought, inadvisably defeated. And I hope that this year, during the real session, after promises to look into this further, that the same measure of accountability that is expected of all other Virginia boards and commissions will be extended to the Virginia Parole Board. There are some issues that will be coming up today in the Virginia Freedom of Information Advisory Council at 2 o'clock. And so I'm not exactly sure of the direction they're going to go, but they have to do, one has to do with access to personal and business contact information. Right now, there is an exemption that allows that information to be redacted if you have signed up to receive news from your, your local government or something. And for that one-way communication, you shouldn't have to sacrifice your contact information, but there's actually a proposal out there right now that would allow the redaction of that information for any correspondence with government, which would include correspondence with lobbyists, with developers, with individuals who might be trying to influence decisions or asking for some sort of benefit, or not necessarily in a bad way, but just asking for the services of government. And we would not be in support of that. The other aspect that the FOIA Council will be taking up today involves electronic meetings, and two parts to that. One is trying to solidify the rules governing when a public body can meet electronically, all virtual, in times of emergency. So Virginia was actually in a pretty good position when the pandemic hit, in that we had some rules in place for emergency meetings, emergencies, and the time of, yes, thank you, emergencies. I've lost my train of thought with that message, but the other aspect of the FOIA Council decision today is going to be about how often a member can call into a meeting without attending in person. And there's been a big letter writing campaign that says that we should eliminate these, any kind of restrictions or caps on this, because of it will encourage more people to, it will produce more diverse public bodies, and there's no evidence to show that, and we think it's a red herring, and so we're going to oppose those kinds of elimination of those kinds of caps. So I will take questions if they are available, if there are any. Otherwise, I just want to encourage you to look at bills that you're interested in to see if they have provisions that might compromise public access and public oversight.
Thanks, Megan. We have one question. What about COVID information, blurring of local cases, contact tracing? Do you have any information on that?
Well, there was the bill that we worked on during the special session that does require the Department of Health to proactively disclose more information about things like outbreaks at congregate settings of institutions that the health department has oversight over. So everything from nursing homes and schools and prisons, summer camps. So that's gone into effect. I'm not exactly sure what the blurring of local cases actually means, so I can't answer that.
Megan, thank you so much. We enjoy working with you on trying to keep government open and accessible to the citizens. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Ashna Khanna with Virginia ACLU. She's the legislative director. Welcome, Ashna.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or kind of good morning still. My name is Ashna Khanna, and as Deb said, I'm the legislative director for the ACLU Virginia. I just want to start off by taking a moment to thank you for allowing me to speak today, especially a shout out to Mary and Deb, who have worked hard to capture us all together during this very hectic time, post special session, right before regular session, and as we know, COVID-19. As much as I'd wish to see all your faces in person, I'm happy to see everyone safe and healthy on this Zoom call, and I hope everyone's loved ones are doing well as too. These are very interesting times we are living in. And something that the ACLU Virginia is the theme of our legislative priorities is that we must confront racism that has been baked into our society. And there's many places where systematic racism shows up. The first that I'll be talking to you about is our right to vote constitutional amendment. Voting is a right, not a privilege. And felony disenfranchisement started in the Jim Crow era as a way to keep Black people from voting. It's a racist policy that still haunts Virginia today. 1 in every 5 African Americans in Virginia can't vote because of felon disenfranchisement. Virginia can prove its commitment to equality by guaranteeing the right to vote and ending this Jim Crow era policy. And so one of our biggest legislative priorities are to pass a constitutional amendment in Virginia that would, 1, repeal the felony disenfranchisement provision, and 2, inserts an affirmative right to vote without restriction for every Virginian who is a U.S. citizen at least 18 years of age. We currently disenfranchise more than 300,000 otherwise eligible voters, most of whom, again, are marginalized communities and Black. At the current restoration, it would take over 30 years to give everyone the rights to vote back. We need to recognize that Virginia is also just one of 3 states in the country where a person convicted of a felony gets banned from voting for life. There's a reason why so many states have moved away from this practice. It's a harsh punishment that takes away a basic American right forever. We don't take away other rights such as free speech or freedom of religion. Virginia should follow the lead of nearly every other state and change its constitution to guarantee the right to vote. In a free society, the government should also not be able to take away the right to vote in the first place, and that's why we call it the Right to Vote campaign. Democracy is about voters choosing their government, not the government choosing its voters. All citizens should be able to use their right, and full citizenship means that they have a voice in government. In Virginia, it should no longer be okay to allow a governor or the government to decide who gets to vote or to privilege some voters over others. And although many different voting laws were passed in the 2020 session, same-day registration, the holiday, there was so many great laws that we saw, we still are lacking that racial justice component. We still need to push for this constitutional amendment to ensure that every person over the age of 18 has the right to vote. Every person, including those who are currently incarcerated in jails or in prisons, and their families, should be governed by the same laws. It is the only right that everyone who meets the qualifications of age, citizenship, and residency has the same opportunity to choose who represents them in crafting those laws. And so yes, this would mean that people who are convicted of felony crimes, for those who are currently incarcerated, will be able to vote. Already right now, though, those who are being held in jails, pretrial, or misdemeanor convictions can vote by absentee ballot. So it isn't a foreign concept. We already tax people who are incarcerated and count, yet they are denied a voice in our government. Full participation in society and democracy is key to successful re-entry from incarceration and ensuring that additional crimes aren't committed. And so, we call to everyone. We have a coalition with multiple organizations that are involved, including the League of Women Voters. Over 20 organizations are on the ground working for this. And so again, passing a constitutional amendment is really difficult. In Virginia, you have to do it on an odd year, so 2021, with an intervening election, and then pass it again with the same language without any dots or any spaces that are moved around, and then only does it go to the ballot. And so this is a reform that we really need everyone together on. Another one of our major priorities are qualified immunity, ending qualified immunity, I should say. So the tragic murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and the recent protests have shown us an urgent need for fundamental changes in our society and in policing. It's a fact that Black and Brown communities face higher rates of arrests, prosecution, convictions, often face harsher sentencing as well. And seeing Black and Brown people harmed or killed by police over and over again has pushed people of all races and backgrounds to demand reform in policing. We must reimagine the role that police play in our society. And one way we must overcome the results of systematic racism is by holding police accountable. So qualified immunity is a legal defense that sets a very high bar for when a police officer is legally responsible for the damage they have caused another person. Currently, for an officer to be held responsible, they must have clearly violated an established right of the individual. And in practice, the courts have found very few rights clearly established. So what this means is that there's essentially a catch-22. This outdated doctrine is essentially a free pass for police officers to violate constitutional rights without being held accountable. For many professions, doctors, lawyers, construction workers, if they violate someone's legal rights, they can be sued and required to pay for the injuries they've caused. Under the doctrine of qualified immunity, police officers are held to a much lower standard. Today we hear about police shooting after police shooting, where officers are rarely held accountable by the criminal legal system, either because prosecutors decline to charge, grand juries decline to indict, or juries decline to convict. Qualified immunity takes away other avenues, the only avenue that victims of police violence should have to hold police accountable. And if Virginia is going to be able to hold police accountable and the departments, we must end qualified immunity and pass a right to sue. And so the Virginia General Assembly in the 2020 special session had this opportunity to pass this bill. However, it didn't pass. And so we are very, very disappointed in the way that the General Assembly has not prioritized this issue when it comes to accountability. And so we may no longer have police can no longer should be able to have this legal shield to hide behind. Real harm to an individual deserves real compensation. And although we've heard many arguments against it, such as ending qualified immunity will bankrupt officers and their families, the fact is police officers are nearly always indemnified for any settlements or judgments against them. We've also heard that this takes away from officers' ability to make a quick split-second decision, although we know that the Fourth Amendment does protect them, and only for reasonable split-second decisions. And I know that time is up. I just want to mention one of our other priorities is marijuana, and making sure we know that the General Assembly will be coming in 2021 to do this. We need to make sure that we ensure racial justice, that we don't criminalize our youth as well. And so with that, I'm so thankful. And I just want to emphasize that legislators work for you. And so if you can use your voice and let them know what really matters to you and what changes they should continue to push for, it's going to take all of us together to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashna. We have time for two quick questions. One is, what minority organizations are you collaborating with? And the other is, who is disenfranchised other than felons? And we know those there who are mentally incompetent, quote unquote, are. So in addition to those two, is anyone else permanently disenfranchised?
Yeah, so for the first one, what local organizations? So all around. So depending on the issue, our Right to Vote coalition has no left terms with Sheba Williams, New Virginia Majority, a whole array of organizations. For marijuana, we work closely with Marijuana Justice. For policing accountability, Black Lives Matter, and many more. And so if folks are really interested in the specific organizations and the coalitions and want to join, I can definitely forward that information to everyone. And then also, the other question in regards to who is also other permanently disenfranchised, and so that would be correct. People who are currently incarcerated, I think when we think about disenfranchisement, it's felony disenfranchisement and those who are claimed as mentally incompetent. And also remembering that currently in our voting system, there's many flaws. And so although we passed a lot of laws, there's still multiple barriers that exist, and we need to ensure that same-day registration gets implemented in a way that's accessible to everyone and not just a few.
Ashna, thank you so much. And as she mentioned, the League of Women Voters of Virginia is a partner in the Right to Vote Coalition. We are also a partner with ACLU Virginia and a number of other organizations in the COVID Justice Coalition. And we appreciate your leadership and partnership in those. Our next speaker, our keynote speaker today, is Brian Koziol. He's the Executive Director of Virginia Housing Alliance. Brian has worked for 9 years in the housing world, having spent most of that time as the Director of Research for Housing Opportunities, Made Equal of Virginia, Inc. Brian has worked on a variety of housing-related topics, including access to opportunity, affordability, mortgage lending, foreclosures, employment, health, and transportation. He has served as a consultant to local governments across the country, helping them to advance equitable housing policy. Brian holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from VCU and resides in Northside Richmond. Brian, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks so much for inviting me to spend the 30 minutes with you all this morning. It's certainly, I had the opportunity to speak to you all last year for much less time. I think it was a hard 5 minutes. So super grateful that I've got a little bit more time today. I do have a pretty hard stop at noon. The Virginia Housing Alliance is in the middle of our 2-day tax credit conference. And so I jumped from there to over here. So I do have a presentation that I wanted to share with you all. And I'm going to move through some things more quickly than others.
Okay.
You all, everyone see that slide? All right. Again, Brian Koziol, Executive Director of the Virginia Housing Alliance. Our mission is to expand affordable housing and end homelessness through a combination of advocacy, education, collaboration, and capacity building. In terms of advocacy, I took over the leadership of the Housing Alliance in October of last year. We went straight into the General Assembly session with a pretty heavy agenda. So during that session, we ended up sending over 6,000 emails to legislators, having constituents, advocating on behalf of our efforts, and really those go into like two primary buckets. So budgetary and legislative. In budgetary, we have been long advocates for the Housing Trust Fund, and this goes to help support grants for homelessness services, as well as gap financing for the construction of affordable housing across the state. It has been historically funded at, $3, $4, $5 million. In 20, the allocation was $11 million. We went in last year and were able to secure $30 million for FY21 and $30 million for FY22. Then COVID hit, we went back to the special session. All of that money was unallotted. Went back into special session, got the funds reallotted with an additional $25 million allocated for 21. Went in, and same thing kind of with funding for the state's eviction prevention and diversion pilot program, which was created in the 2019 General Assembly. We went in and were able to get $6.6 million in funding for this program. After that funding was unallotted by the governor, and then during the special session, we were able to go back in and get $3.3 million. We also advocate for budgetary line items for permanent supportive housing. And same thing, this year has been so difficult, particularly kind of coming off the heels of really good success in the regular session, in where we were able to secure $25.5 million for FY21 and $34 million for FY22. Those funds were again unallotted, and after special session was all said and done, we were only able to secure $3 million for FY21 and $13 million for FY22, which brings FY22 funding back up to level, back up to the 2019 level. Legislatively, we were part of a broad coalition that was able to finally, after years and years and years, add housing protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. I believe those that bill was first introduced by Senator Marsh in like 1990, 1991. So it has been an incredibly long time coming. So super proud to have been a part of that effort. We also were able to add veteran status protections to that, and then really led the charge on adding source of income protections to the Fair Housing Act. And so no longer are landlords able to deny housing based upon the tenant's use of a housing choice voucher. That was certainly the most contentious issue I have ever worked on at the General Assembly. But you know, it was a really significant group effort, and we spent a lot of time working on that, and continue to. It's not it was not a perfect bill by any means. There were some, you know, the way in which, unfortunately, the sausage gets made down there sometimes is not pretty, but feel like we laid a very solid foundation from which to build. And as we move on and let the courts play, you know, court cases play out, we think that over time, this legislation will hopefully be really impactful. We were also able to help shepherd a bill to create a task force to study the creation of an opportunity tax credit, which was HB 810, introduced and carried by Delegate Jeff Bourne, who also carried HB 6, which was the source of income bill. And, you know, so the opportunity tax credit basically is a state low-income housing tax credit program. The federal low-income housing tax credit program is responsible for the development and creation of about 95% of all affordable housing in the country. There are, off the top of my head, about 17 states that have their own low-income housing tax credit programs. And we are hopefully well on our way to at least creating the programmatic structure in the General Assembly. Time will tell where we, you know, how successful we are in actually gaining or getting the tax credits allocated, but we're really hopeful that this year we can do the program and obtain the credits. Education, we, you know, VHA hosts a number of conferences and programmatic best practices in education events. We are right now in the middle of our credit conference. We did virtual Housing Virginia's Most Vulnerable back in September of this year. It's normally in June. COVID threw everything off. And then we also have a AmeriCorps Vista program in which we manage 14 AmeriCorps Vista members at affordable housing organizations across the state to help really with the, you know, building the internal capacity of the nonprofit housing sector, as well as professional development. So every year, you know, about a third of the AmeriCorps Vistas end up getting hired full-time by their host sites. And so we're kind of really seeding the nonprofit housing industry with you know, really bright folks, as well as building their internal capacity. So, you know, just really quickly, the 14 Vistas last year leveraged $1.5 million in additional cash resources through 48 new grant opportunities. They increased the community volunteer capacity for these organizations by 428 individual volunteers, and then we're able to serve 850 new clients spread out through these organizations. So super successful program, and it's a great way to just kind of continue to seed the housing nonprofit sector. So want to jump in, and I've got a ton of slides and not a whole lot of time, so I'm going to try and move through these really quickly, but I really want to talk about the problem, right? And we can fund and go after more resources for housing, which we certainly absolutely need. But funding is part of the problem, and I'm going to talk about racial wage disparities, wage growth, and then the shift in corporate profits. That's all kind of putting a lot of strain and downward pressure on housing stock. And so these charts, and I'll make these slides available. I'll send them to Mary. Shows the wage gap between Black and white earners, and so the average here is looking at. So we're looking at 2000, 2007 is the medium blue. 2019 is the light blue. The wage gap is increasing between Black and white earners. It is smallest at the 10th percentile, at the very lowest wages, and is highest at the that 95th percentile, the highest wage earners. It's actually more pronounced with college graduates, and decreases a little bit between with advanced degrees. I think this regression based down here takes into controls for education, age, gender, in region. So it may provide us a little bit better, more specific gap, but it's still significant, right? And so there are a lot of underlying issues in our society as to why we have an housing affordability issue, and wages is one. Additionally, this chart shows the relationship between workers' productivity and their hourly compensation. And so going back here to about 1940 until really about 1979, the rising tide really did lift all boats, right? And as the economy expanded, workers, as productivity increased, workers benefited from that increase in productivity. About 1979, we started to see a really hard divergence there, and productivity increased about 70%, while compensation only increased about 11%. When you go back and look from 1948 to 1979, see a much closer correlation: 108% increase in productivity and 93% increase in compensation. So really, long story short, people are more productive, but they're not making any more. These two charts show employee pay as a share of national income. Here at the top, beginning in 1970, the gray areas are recessions, and then corporate profits as a share of that national income as well. And you see really since about the recession in 91, that those two models trending in opposition. So employee pay is decreasing and accounts for about 62% of national income, and corporate profits have been increasing up to, a high of, 14.5%. And so again, I think what we're getting to here is that we have a housing cost burden issue. And this chart is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it's the housing cost burden by income group. And really what we're looking at is here are our lowest income, 0 to 30% of the area median income. 90%, give or take, of them are cost burden, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. About 70% of them are severely cost burden, meaning that they spend more than 50% of their household income on their housing costs. And you can see that this cost burden is strongly correlated with income. As income increases, cost burden goes down. These graphs show the affordable and available homes per 100 renter households. And so we see that same correlation at or below. So this is at less than 30%. We only have 36 homes per 100 renters available, right? So we've got 64 households out of 100 that can't afford a place to live at this extremely low income. It gets slightly better, and we're actually have a little bit of an abundance of homes for rent at 100% of area median income and above. So, and I think that you all have seen this. I saw a copy of the housing report that I know that all of y'all have reviewed. And this is again from our friends at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And we're looking at here the fair market rent of a 2-bedroom unit is $1,229 in the state of Virginia. At median income, we're looking at $2,300. And if you work a full-time job paying the mean renter wage, you're looking at rent of $971. Rent if you make 30% of AMI is $700. You make minimum wage, which is $725 in this state. Your rent, so that you're not cost burden, is $377. So what do we end up with all of the charts and data that I just talked through really briefly? I apologize, it's a lot to digest. We end up with an average worker making minimum wage having to work 3.3 full-time jobs to afford a 2-bedroom home rental unit. So I go through all of this to say that we have an affordability issue, but we also really have a social issue, right? And we simply just don't pay people enough to make ends meet in this country. So the way that we traditionally go about solving these issues is through the Housing Trust Fund. Really quickly, these numbers have since changed this year. It was established in 2013. This year is the first time that we've actually really had a chunk of money to really get out. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we were able to push that through the General Assembly, and we are, I want $200 million a year, and I hope that we get there sooner than later, because the need is so critically important. But this should read 60% are for low interest loans to meet the financing needs of affordable housing, and 40 are for grants targeted to reduce homelessness. In FY 2019, the Housing Trust Fund was at $11 million. It provided funding for 13 projects, created 1,236 units of affordable housing and 16 homeless reduction grants. I mean, 1,236 units of affordable housing is a great start, but we need to triple, quadruple, quintuple that number annually to start meeting the needs of our lowest income households in Virginia. I'm going to talk about really quickly the rent mortgage relief program, which was stood up by the Department of Housing and Community Development in response to COVID. And the way that the markets work is that landlords have expenses as well. And kind of going back to those previous charts, you know, really the issue in the way that we kind of work through these things is Band-Aids, right? And so we are now, instead of investors forgiving portions of their profits to keep people stably housed and keep the markets stable, governments are having to make direct payments to landlords and residents to keep them safely housed, right? And so that's the approach. It's always kind of a downstream approach, but it is what it is. So COVID-19 pandemic, you know, stabilize the housing market, keep people in their apartments and homes safely so they can quarantine if needed, isolate, and you know, at the end of the day, just stay safe. So right now we've got three approaches. The landlord approach, which is being administered by Virginia Housing, formerly Virginia Department, or formerly VHDA, Virginia Housing Development Authority. They're our state housing finance organization. And we have a tenant homeowner approach, working with 30 grantees from across the state. In the next kind of iteration of the process, RMRP 2.0 will be a statewide call center so that people can call directly and access resources. RMRP pays for 100% of the current month's mortgage or rent plus associated fees, 100% of past due mortgages, starting at April 1st. Currently authorized to spend $62 million through the end of December 30th, 2020. We have been hammering our congressional delegation for the dire need to extend the deadline for the use of CARES Act funding. It currently ends on December 30th. We really need it to go into next year. This pandemic is not going away anytime soon, even with the vaccine on the horizon. There's $30 million from Community Development Block Grant CARES Act funds, and then the special session of the General Assembly allocated $12.5 million of the Housing Trust Fund, and there's additional language in there that mandates the trust fund be used as a backstop for RMRP, which is critically important. We need people to stay current on their mortgages and stay safe. But I think it's worth pointing out that if we run into the situation where we don't get more federal resources or find additional state resources, we are now taking all of the forward momentum that we've invested so heavily into the production pipeline in creating affordable housing and just moving back to a period of stabilization, and it's kind of gut-wrenching to see that happen. Real quick by the numbers, through November 18th, this is the most current data. I don't think the back half of November has been rolled up yet. So 18,771 applications received. They've dispersed 33.6 million in rent payments and rent and mortgage payments for 11,000 households. That difference is 7,500 households. They're pending. And those are for a variety of reasons, but most of them deemed eligible, but are still working on documentation or working through payment plans with landlords, mortgage companies. Of those households that have been served, 64% are households with children under 8, 55% include children ages 9 to 7, 51% of them are Black households. White households accounted for 35% of those served. Really quickly, I know I'm coming up on time, and there's a bill out there, HB 854, that mandates that the Department of Housing and Community Development basically do it. It's a omnibus study bill, right? And it's sorely needed. We haven't had a comprehensive assessment of the quality and quantity of affordable and workforce housing across the state, which is one of the priorities. It's also going to review current programs and policies that the state administers, which is also really important, which I don't think has ever occurred before. And then really kind of put together a projection of future housing needs, right? We've done this regionally. We haven't done it as a state, and then make recommendations for the improvement of housing policy across the state. So looking at the introduction or the creation of a Virginia rent subsidy program that would work in conjunction with the federal housing choice voucher program. Several states have these. We certainly know that to meet the needs of extremely low-income households, we have to have rental assistance, and the federal program is just overwhelmed, right? There's not enough funding, there's not enough vouchers, the demand and need is too great. And so it would be great if we could have a Virginia program that really targeted those most vulnerable populations across the state. Looking at utility rate reductions for qualified affordable housing, property tax reduction for affordable housing for localities that wish to provide such an incentive. So like a tax abatement or reduction, bond financing options, and then existing programs, to just increase the supply of affordable housing across the state. That is all I've got. I will definitely share those slides. I'm looking through all of these comments really quickly. All right. Does non-discrimination in housing include those with a criminal record? No, it doesn't. But I do know that there is some case law working, or some cases working its way through the court. I was part of some work at Housing Opportunities Made Equal that put out a model Tennessee look-back period. So we were hearing then, people on their credit reports and background checks looking back 99 years. And if you had anything at all on your record, you were denied housing. So we got that kind of reduced down to 7. But certainly we all are aware of the dire need for criminal justice reform and sentencing reform, and part of that I certainly think should include housing protections for people with criminal records. The NOAA question in Hampton Roads. How do these older homes will become even more? So that's a really good question, Carolyn Kaywood, about Hampton Roads. Certainly, there are no easy answers. There was a constitutional amendment passed last year or the year before, I can't remember, that allowed jurisdictions in Tidewater and actually across the state to provide tax abatement and tax relief for households to do flood mitigation in response to rising sea levels, but it's certainly a huge issue that I don't know if we have necessarily addressed. I mean, honestly, we're still arguing about whether or not climate change is real in Virginia, unfortunately. Martha, unfortunately, we do not provide direct line services, but we are connected to a vast network of folks that do. So if you have someone on this, know of someone, we can certainly act as a referral and get them to the people that actually can help. Yes, I will share the slides. And I think raising minimum wage to $15 an hour would help. It would put more dollars in people's pockets, which helps everyone, right? It gives them more income, more disposable income. Certainly, there will be some pressure on rents and pricing across the state, but at the end of the day, we have to pay people more, right? We can't continue to extract wealth from communities and from workers and expect, and then continue to expect the government to basically subsidize corporate profits. All right.
Brian, thank you so much. Yeah. We really appreciate your working us into, we know we took you away from your conference, and so thank you so much, and always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
So we will take a break now until 12:30. We'll return at 12:30 sharp. Do want you to visit our store and pick up some League swag. We've got some great masks in there. It's not, it's still mask wearing season, and some other great things. We hope that we're going to see the ERA pass or be written into our Constitution soon. You can get an ERA pin to push that over the line. So enjoy your little lunch break, and we'll see you back at 12:30. Thanks.